Thank you for staying with us. We hit the big stories on the AM show. And of course, we do know that the National Peace Council has actually followed with some concern the unfortunate violent clashes in some parts of the country, on the back of which they have issued a statement. And they are calling for the Inspector General of Police, together with the security agencies, to do more to strengthen their investigations to ensure that we get to the very bottom of some of these developments. Well, joining us this morning, and he's been gracious enough to do so, though being very far away, he's joining the conversation virtually. Reverend Dr. Ernest Edujemfi, Chairman of the National Peace Council. Rev, thank you so much for joining us this morning on the AM show. Doc, I think you would have to unmute. I think your connection is still muted.
Right.
Yes, I think I can hear you now. It's really good to have you join the conversation from where you are. Just to situate the conversation, this wouldn't be the first time that the National Peace Council has come out on the back of such happenings. But why this time? There have been other things that have happened where in recent times we've not heard the National Peace Council come out to issue a statement or talk with some level of urgency about it. Why now?
I think, thank you for your question. For the work of the council, we've been very active in all these areas. I think I've said on other platforms that currently we are dealing with about 300 chieftaincy, tribal, and land litigation issues across the country. Sometimes we act quietly, and so the public consistently accuses us that nothing is happening, even though we've been working. Now we think that there's a need to change our approach a little bit and sometimes be a little proactive in terms of some of the things that we're doing. In this particular case, all the cases that have been highlighted now, either at Kintampo in the Blue region, in Kwanta in the Oti region, and the Wanchiki in the northeast, the regional peace councils have been active in those areas, working constructively to help mitigate some of these things. But we must admit that sometimes the issue is above just the work of the council. Currently, we call on the IGP and the security services to intervene, and we are aware that there have been some interventions in some of those places. Calm has been restored in some places, but there's a need now for us to look at means to deal with the issues that are on hand. That is the reason why we're coming in now to make the intervention.
I see. And when you look at the different pockets of issues that we have had from Kintampo to Wanchiki and all of these developments, how do they strike you? Obviously, you have your finger on the pulse of what has been happening, but do these strike you as creating even more of an urgent situation that has to be nipped in the bud?
I think it's a very urgent situation. As I said, there are pockets of issues across the country. And while we're dealing with some of these things and trying to negotiate through them, other issues come up. And so it takes the attention of the ones we're working on. We focus on these things to bring stability. Then we have to go back and deal with some of these other issues. What we need now is collective effort of our whole country. We need the media to support us. We need the chieftaincy institution to support us, the Ministry of Religious Affairs. We need everybody to come on board to help us, because most of these issues are tribal conflicts. The interpretation of ancestral laws have not been done the way they ought to be done. So people are coming in, rewriting history, creating new boundaries. And these are critical issues confronting the country. And we have to collectively find a way to deal with them.
Now, the National Peace Council is doing its bit in this respect, but specifically referring to these issues, what is the footprint of the National Peace Council? I mean, when it comes to Wanchiki, for example, when it comes to Kintampo, what have you been doing in these places before and now on the back of these latest developments?
In the Kintampo issue, the more conflict, we've been there for at least the last 2-3 years. talking with people, trying to find a way out. The Regional Peace Council is actively working in there. But, you know, issues of religion, issues of tribe, issues of ethnicity are critical issues when it comes to peace building. Once you touch any of those areas, people react violently. And that is why we keep telling the country, don't get into religious conflict, don't get into tribal conflict, don't get into ethnic conflict. These are things that touches the soul and the lives of people. And so when you get into some of those areas, people react violently. And there's a need for us to keep drumming this hope that funding ethnicity, funding tribal conflict, funding religious conflicts will not help us as a people. And we need to do everything we can to stop these things as much as possible.
There are so many pockets of worrying developments. You can talk about Boku. You can talk about, in recent times, we had other skirmishes. The specific place in the northern belt doesn't come to mind. When I remember, I'll get to it, where, in fact, there was that reprisal from the military where national security officers were attacked, shot at even when they had gone into a police station. And then the security officials, specifically the military, went there and brutalized a number of them, whipping, beating, and all of that. I'll just try to recall the area. But there appears to be, in many pockets of not just the northern belt, different parts of the country, worrying trends of people being armed to the teeth in some instances, sometimes even spilling over into armed robbery, making our roads very unsafe when traveling certain portions, including the Kintampo stretch. When you look at all of these in the context of the wider problem of the sub-region, insurgency, terrorism, look at the countries surrounding us, and look at the coup d'etats that have happened, how then do you situate this latest release from the Peace Council and the happenings within Ghana?
Thank you very much. I think the issue of proliferation of small arms is a very serious issue in our country. If you look at the number of arms that are in homes and in the hands of the youth, it is a very worrying situation. And that is what is spilling up into all of these things. And some of our research in the north, in the past, most young people would want to get a bicycle or motorbike, and they think that he's come to a certain level of status. Now it's not motorbikes, it's guns. So everybody is trying to buy a gun. And that is a very worrying situation for our country, with so many young people holding guns across the country. And that leads to these things. So with the least provocation, somebody picks up arms and starts shooting. So we have to do collectively everything we can to stop these things and bring them to some level of control as much as we can. And I think that everybody is needed as far as this whole project is concerned.
In terms of collaborative work, because you're calling on the Inspector General of Police, the police service, among others, to put their foot down, what exactly do you want to see done?
Well, I think that in terms of guns, there's a need to find some regulation. Are these guns registered? Where are they coming from? Who is selling them? And why is it so easy for people to lay hands on these things? These are issues that I believe the police must come in to help us. Maybe the immigration services may have to also up their game in terms of border controls and how they search through these things. Because there are too many of them coming in. And sometimes, especially in the Boku area, when you see the kind of arms that people are holding, it's frightening.
Sometimes they outgun our security services. The arms, the ammunition they wield is far more sophisticated than what our security services have at their disposal.
That's correct. And it's a very worrying situation. And I think we have to do everything we can to control this. Because if we get to a certain point, and especially the young people get into the streets and start firing, it's going to be a very critical issue for the country. And we all have to do everything we can. First, educate the people. We've been having this conversation across the country on preventing violent extremism. We've done as much as we can. We're still doing them, even though resource to do some of these things sometimes a constraint for us. But I think that these are things that we have to keep pushing across the country to ensure that people understand that there's a need to talk and resolve problems instead of resorting to firearms.
Now, I mean, I spotted a video on one of my platforms recently where I do not think it's Ghana, but it could be along the border or something, a neighboring country, where someone was smuggling ammunition or arms in beans. So it's been put in a sack and everything. And you have AK-47s, you have the magazines, you have all of that in there. The sub-region is becoming a hotbed for terrorist activity. You've spoken about the police service and what you expect of them, but they also have their own resource challenges. I know just yesterday or so they put out another batch of cadets that are just, been recruited or graduated in recent times, and it created quite a bit of a standstill around that area. But the point I want to make is on the bit about small arms and light weapons, the commission in Ghana has over the years, even there was a point where they gave an amnesty that, look, if you have arms and all of that, bring them, let bygones be bygones. We will not prosecute, there'll be nothing of that sort. Very few people, from what I remember, took them in. But when you look at the statistics, the proliferation of small arms and light weapons, and especially in the northern belt, the predictions or statistics about those who likely have them, it is a great cause for concern. In that regard, what is the National Peace Council doing? How are you collaborating with the Small Arms and Light Weapons Commission to sanitize the system? Because like it or not, next year is an electoral year. Usually around this time, there will be a lot of skirmishes. We have banned these, what do you call them, vigilante groups, but under there, some of them are still extant. I mean, how are you thinking around all these issues?
In terms of the small arms, we are fortunate to have the chair of the Small Arms Commission being a member of the Peace Council board. And so that gives us access to a lot of information as to what is happening in those areas. We will keep on with our preventing violent extremism training. As I said, currently we are working with some of our partners to raise the needed funding to deal with some of these issues. Last Friday, we met with a team from the US and they talked to them about the support that we need to get some of these training programs and activities done. So we're doing the best we can to raise the resources we need to get our work done. But it's a very difficult situation for us because dealing with over 300 cases across the country and then leading to the next election, it becomes a very worrying situation. Whilst we're dealing with this, then you have the political issues coming in. That keeps its own distractions. And it's a very critical situation for us. And so we're calling on everybody to help us. And as much as possible, even community leaders who can talk to people should intervene in some of these cases. Sometimes we have assemblymen and others in those communities who can also talk to people to lay down their arms and talk and resolve issues. Festivals have become an issue. If you look at the Nkwanta case and some of these other, just a celebration of a festival becomes a problem. And these are things that I believe communities can sit and talk and resolve them. You have your festival this time, we'll have our festival this time. But why would we want to have festival, all of us, within the same time period? So these are critical issues confronting us. And we will keep on doing whatever we can with our training programs, with our intervention programs, empowering our regional councils as much as possible to get into some of those areas and do the best we can to minimize the conflicts.
Now, speaking of same, especially as the electoral time beckons, I mean, it started already. The two major political parties have their flag bearers, and they've already hit the ground running as far as campaigning. Dr. Bawumia is on his thank you tour. Former President Mahama has been touring the nation, talking about the plans he has for the country should he get re-elected. But have you started engaging the political parties yet? These are sparks that we're seeing already. Have you started engaging the political parties ahead of the next election, the electoral cycle?
There's a very serious engagement going on. In fact, we should have had a meeting last Monday, but it's been shifted to the 14th of December. I hope you recall that immediately after the election, the last election, we convened at Ada and brought together all the players, the election space, for a 4-day dialogue. And after that dialogue, there was a communique and a roadmap that was drawn. Some activities were assigned to various groups to deal with. We're calling another conference on the 14th of December, bring all these parties together and review the decisions that were made during the Adan conference, the activities that were assigned, where are we? And so all the political parties will be there, Peace Council will be there, the Electoral Commission, the representative from the Chief Justice, all of us are going to be there to talk about what we've done, the steps that we've taken, the way forward, and how we anticipate that the campaigning and election processes is going to look like in next year. So we are already working along with all the players to ensure that there's stability in the country. In terms of competition, we know sometimes it can be rough. What the Peace Council is insisting is that let's compete, but let us remember that we have to keep the peace of our country together.
In terms of your work dealing with the political parties, some people often say we go to sleep until another electoral cycle beckons. Is that really the case?
I think it's a wrong perception. This year, we've had quarterly meetings with the political parties. We've had 2 already. And the third one, we missed it because we couldn't find the funding. But we're doing this other one, bringing them all together again to discuss the issues. And I think that when we do these things, it helps. We had a dialogue again in Pram Pram between all the political parties and the security services. It was a very wonderful experience for us to be there for 3 days. The political parties talking to security services, how they feel about them, the security services talking to them about how they feel. And at the end of the day, the parties came to us and said, look, Chairman, can you organize this thing for all our regions for us? We're looking for the funding. If we can find it, we will do it across the regions to ensure that political parties and security services understand themselves and play the game the way it ought to be played and not run the country down.
Speaking of which, you just mentioned funding. What's the situation like for the National Peace Council? I know I may be digressing slightly, but I just would like to find out, because that will also determine whether you're able to do your work as you would want to do it, or whether there is any, there are any hurdles that impinge on your work. So what's the situation like? How do you even get funding? I'm sure some people will be curious about your work.
Well, it's the government that's the main financier of the council. They pay all our staff, excluding board members, because as we keep saying that board members are not on salary. They provide us some money for goods and services, which is inadequate in terms of our work. Now, the council's work is so fluid that we wish we could have been resourced like the security, what do we call it? National security, where as soon as something happens, you are ready to move. You look at the 3 cases that are on hand now. Immediately, we need resources to move across the country. And we need emergency funding. And that was why we set up the Peace Fund to help us to find the resource to do some of these things. But we haven't had the support that we need. Most of our support now in terms of our activities comes from donors. We have the U.S. Embassy, the Danish Embassy, the UNDP, who are main support, and all these groups coming in. Now we are trying to reach even to World Bank to see if we can find some support from there. So we need an emergency funding. Something happens in Kwanta. You say the Peace Council, immediately the Regional Peace Council is there. And sometimes if you're bringing board members together, they're coming from different places. You have to find a hotel for them. You provide accommodation. You provide transportation. You have to feed them within the... And negotiation in terms of conflict doesn't end in a day. You keep going to some of those places. So we want to appeal to the public, and especially to the business community, that let us support the Peace Fund, because it's in the realm of peace that you can run business. It's in the realm of peace that we can have our hospitals operating, in the realm of peace that our market women can go to the market. And everybody must help us to get things done the way it ought to be done. And so we appeal to the public, let's all contribute to the Peace Fund so that the National Peace Council can work the way we ought to work.
You speak about
the U.S. delegation on Friday. We told them the same thing, that donors are not ready to give money for situations like that because they want to sponsor projects. Let's say we want to do a program for tertiary students, they'll give us money. Want to do something in the secondary school, they'll give us money. But if we talk about having money on hand that you can easily deploy, that becomes an issue. But those are the concerns that we do have now, that we need that emergency response fund to run the Peace Council so that as soon as something happens and you call on the Peace Council, immediately we can deploy our members to the situation to deal with that.
But would it not also be about convincing these bodies that whatever sums of money they're going to donate will actually be put into the specific use? I know many of these bodies, when they donate, the major concern is it going to be appropriated elsewhere, or is it going to be used specifically, crossing the T's and dotting the I's, where it's supposed to be used? Those are concerns, and I feel if you were able to convince them, they just might be ready to support, because peace in the South is already very, it's sitting on pins and needles right now. Don't you think that's an area maybe that has not been properly addressed?
Well, for donors, their concern is that they don't want to give money to a governmental institution, as it were, because they feel that once they give the money, the government will have control over the money.
Right.
So we've been convincing them that we have the Peace Fund, which is under our control, which does not go to the government. And I think when we met with the U.S. delegation, they understood that, it's a very critical situation for us to convince people that, look, we need these things. And like all of us are crying. I mean, if you go to Boku now, business is already closed. There's nothing activity happening there. The Kintampo situation, the Kwata situation, all these things are coming up. Virtually, you find businesses closed. And if you find a place like Kintampo hit seriously, that is the center of our country, where goods and services are coming from the north, moving from south to the north, are crossing to Burkina and all those places. So there's a need to bring stability to that belt to ensure that the country can find peace and do the things that we ought to do. In terms of managing our resources, for all our donors, we have accounted to them perfectly, and nobody has raised any query about any money that have been given to the Peace Council. And we keep giving them that promise. And that is why we keep getting funding for some of the programs that we've been doing. And most of these programs we run on violent extremism, they've all been funded by donors from outside. But sometimes we think that it is not good enough for us as a country. Because once the project is done, you have to write a report. And to us, it gives an impression as if by the time we finish each project, we've given all the information about our country to donors, which to us is not the best. So there's a need for Ghanaians to see the need to support the National Peace Council to get our work done.
What has that drive been like as far as the Peace Council, the Peace Fund is concerned? How many Ghanaians or Ghanaian entities have contributed in the past? Can you give us an idea of the stark disparity, if there is, between what our foreign donors give and what we have given?
Well, if you compare to what the foreign donors have given, it's nothing to write home about, because we launched this about 2 years ago, and so far all the money we have is around 290,000 Ghana cedis, and that is not enough. Even for that, is
that both from corporate Ghana, individuals,
yes,
and goodwill?
Everybody. I mean, that's not enough. I mean, if we take up one activity, that money is gone. But we've just decided to put in an investment. We are just keeping it there for now because we want to add to it, so that once we start deploying, we know exactly what we are doing. So, I mean, if you look at some of the projects the donors gave, the violent extremism program that we run, the last election, we did this across all the constituencies. We're in every constituency. This election, we plan to do the same once we find the funding to do that. The training programs we've had for the tertiary institution leaders, we did one in Elmina, we did one in Kumasi, and all of these things have been funded by donors. And now we are in the secondary schools trying to teach them about violent extremism and how to control themselves, especially when students finish their exams and they are burning school cars and burning this and breaking all of those. There's a need for us to be in all these areas. But to do that, you need the funding to deploy easily.
Now, let's go back to the hardcore bits about Nkwanta, Kintampo, and Wanchiki. you look at these developments. You've said you're collaborating with the police. In fact, you are asking them, calling upon them to swiftly deal with these matters. Which other entities are you collaborating with in that respect? Because there are chieftaincy angles to this. There are traditional angles to some of what we're seeing. For example, in the case of the festival, and you can do this and you can't do that and all of that. So which other entities are you collaborating with on these or in these latest issues that have popped up to bring some peace to these areas?
Well, the first group we are dealing with is the regional security councils, because they are on the ground and they are the first to deal with the situation to bring stability. Once there's stability, there's some level of security within the area, it makes our work easier. So then we can go in and start talking. But in the situation that we have on our hands now, we need the Land Commission, we need the Ministry for Religious and Chieftaincy Affairs to come along with us. And then we need also the judiciary to come along with us, because some of these things, some of the cases have been in court for years and they are not resolved. So the people keep fighting. So there must be some resolution. And then also, maybe after these court cases, there might be some group probably to continue to talk to them and provide some ADR in between for people to understand themselves. Because they are talking about history. And many of us were not there when all these things started. And when people reconstruct history and they are not done properly, that is the mess in which we find ourselves now.
Now, many other thoughts come to mind, but I want to run this by you. Peace anywhere hinges on a number of factors. One thing that is crystal clear is that our leadership tends to focus on regime security or national security from the standpoint of militarization or military operations, security, intel, and all of that. But some crucial aspects of our security, in fact, probably the most crucial one now, is what many call human security. Are you providing the right environment for business to thrive? Are you providing the right environment for people to live out their lives in dignity, to have that enjoyability, if you like, of the life that they live? If you look at the economic situation, if you look at everything else that is happening in Ghana, then you would see a certain picture. My question then is, are you as a Peace Council also shifting, paying attention to the human security? Because once that goes out the window, chaos ensues. So while we take care of security a la Ghana Police Service and all of that, how about the things that people need? Because if someone has what he or she needs, the basics, they don't want to risk that to put the nation in turmoil. But when they don't have it, then they sometimes become, I don't know what word to use, but they want to risk it all because they think, after all, what? So how are you addressing that angle to this peace crisis we're facing?
Thank you. In the first place, I think if you look at the national security architecture now, the Peace Council was placed in the center of it, because I think that the designers looked at the fact that it's not only hard security that can keep our country safe, but we need the soft security, and that is the role we play. The unfortunate thing is that the resourcing of the council to do the work hasn't been the way we had anticipated, or the way it worked out. And that is what creates the difficulty that we're in. But again, we have also drawn the attention of government to especially the critical issue of youth employment. It's been on our lips. We've been talking about it all over. And I think everybody is aware of it, that if we don't deal with these issues, it's going to create a big problem for us. And sometimes we keep telling the youth that when politicians come to you and they are talking about vote for me and all, ask simple questions. What are you going to do in terms of youth employment? What is your plan? We should ask those critical questions and determine what are they going to do to ensure that these things come to an end. But sometimes we just follow them and they keep talking and everybody is running around. At the end of the day, we don't know where we are. So dealing with human security is a very critical issue. I was doing one interview and someone was asking me about all the people who are trying to go abroad now. And I keep telling them that, look, it's not that easy being abroad. We know the risk people are going through. We know the difficulties, and yet they keep doing it. because they think that there's something else where that they can find. Everybody's trying to run away. So there's a need for us to deal with human security. How do we provide shelter? How do we provide food for our people? How do we provide the environment for our people to walk around freely and easily and to do what they ought to do? And I think that everybody in this country must come on board to help us to make this a reality.
I would like to find out then, going into 2024, which is an electoral year, you've already told me about some of what you've started doing as a Peace Council, but do you have a clear strategy in terms of other activities, if you could walk us through them ahead of election 2024, that you'll be bringing to bear to maintain the peace that we enjoy as a country?
Well, we will roll out the normal programs that we do beginning from January. We'll be doing our regional programs, district programs, and ensure that we educate people to maintain peace in the midst of the campaigning all around. Those things will continue to be done. We've done some training for the GPRG. We'll continue with that. We've done training for our fisher folks. We'll keep doing that. We've done training for the queen mothers and market women. We will keep doing some of these, and the same thing is what we've done for the youth. But generally for elections, we've always had early warning groups that start meeting from January. We meet every month, and that's a group that brings together key players within the political space to strategize as to how to handle the election. And then it culminates into the situation room during the week of the election. So all those plans are on the table, and beginning January, all these things will be rolled out.
In terms, though, of the MPC's work in this regard, you notice, for example, that many of our schools, from the tertiary level to even very basic levels, are being infiltrated, so to speak, with politics in different ways. Some of them very palpable, others not so clearly seen, but they are there. Are you tackling the school angle or the educational angle? Because it's what makes it interesting for me. You go to places like Cuba and there's, yes, some propaganda, but there's a certain mindset taught to children right from the start. I'm asking whether maybe we shouldn't be tackling the problem from that end very early so that these children get to know what is at stake rather than fall victim to NPP, NDC politics.
Yes, we've already done that. We started from last year. We did one training for the tertiary institution leaders. We brought them from all the schools. We had two programs, one for the South, one for the North. Currently, we are working in some of the secondary schools as well, teaching them what it means to stay away from violent extremism and all of that. We will keep doing these things because we think that if we're able to go down to the level of the youth, help them to understand these things, it will be very helpful to us. Even in our next engagement with the political parties, we are asking all of them to bring some of their youth leaders to these meetings because they must understand some of these. If you bring the top people, they come in and talk and leave, and then the young people don't even understand what is going on. We are going to have all these agitations. So we are now looking at how do we come down to the level of the young people, help them to understand what it means to keep the peace of our country. And we hope that we will make some progress in terms of this adventure.
Right. Finally, to cap off the conversation, and this is quite a digression, but I'd like you to find, with all the sentiment that has been shared on the National Cathedral, especially as you're talking about funding for the National Peace Council, that is not exactly coming through. What do you think of that project at this point in time in respect of our IMF program and the economic difficulties we're facing? We've had talk from some of the board members that we should go full steam ahead. It's the support that doesn't come through. But what do you make of it? Before I let you bring through your final words on what we've been discussing.
Well, I think that that responsibility rests on the board. They've already told us that they will find the money to do it. If
They've
they
not
can
found
find
it.
the money, if they can find it from whichever source they can, probably saving the country from going back into our budget for some of these monies, they can go ahead and do their project. As far as I'm concerned, it adds to the infrastructure of our country if we can do it. It can add to tourism. It can raise funds for the country. I've been to the National Bible Museum in
But do we need it at a point in time like this with all the resources, the resource constraints we are facing? Right now, because we've not got the 600 million from the IMF, we're on the ropes again.
Now, what I said is, if the board can find the money from wherever without, inflicting any pain on our budget, then that is their prerogative. Sometimes we may find donors who may be willing to do that if they can negotiate for some of those things. But that is the work they've been assigned to do. So we'll leave them to see what they can do. But they must also listen to the concerns of Ghanaians, and especially the period in which we are. But somebody told me that leaders are chosen to solve problems. And so they have a problem, then they must solve it. And it's for them to find the means to deal with that.
Your final words, Reverend Edu James-Fee, on all these matters we've been discussing this morning, the way forward.
We've had 2 meetings the past week, one with a delegation from Sierra Leone, Gambia, and Zambia. Then we had another delegation from the US. In both meetings, the first delegation, who is an African delegation, told us that we are here to listen to you, to see what you are doing. If Ghana fails, Africa has failed. In our meeting with the US team, they said the same thing. We are here because we think that if Ghana fails, Africa has failed. Everybody is looking up to Ghana because they think that we provide stability and peace. And it's important for us as a country to see what others see about us, protect the peace we have, live like one people with one nation. And I think that is my appeal to all Ghanaians. There is something good in our country, even though it is not perfect. Let us all work on it, work towards achieving the goals that we have set ourselves, live in peace with one another, and certainly we can enjoy what we have as a people.
Well, thank you very much, Reverend Edu James-Fee, for joining the conversation this morning and for the fantastic work that you're doing. I think I'll also add my voice to yours for those who can, and all of us can, even in our smallest ways, make a donation to the kitty of the National Peace Fund. Let us do so. Just in passing, though, for those who may want to contribute, how can they do it?
Unfortunately, I don't have the information on hand because of where I am now.
Okay.
But I think I will ask Isaiah Secretary to pass on the information so that if you can put it out for us, we'll be grateful.
Thank you very much, sir, for joining the conversation. And again, we deeply appreciate it. We know how tight you are, but you made the time to interact with us this morning and wish you the very best in your work. That's Reverend Dr. Ernest Edu James-Fee. He is chairman of the National Peace Council. Especially, it's been this conversation on the back of what has happened in Nkwanta, in the Oti region, Kintampo, in the Bono area, and of course, Wanchiki, I beg your pardon, in the Upper East region, and those developments there. We'll keep our finger on the pulse of these matters and bring you the latest on them on the show and in our subsequent bulletins. But the Second-D Takoradi Metropolitan Assembly is on a drive to rid the metropolis of filth and open defecation. According to the Assembly, over 1,400 households in the SDMA do not have toilet facilities, forcing 702 households to resort to open defecation. Now, you know the situation of that. How, as a country, we've tried to actually eradicate open defecation, its health implications, its implication on our country's kitty. Well, the Assembly is partnering Joy News on this campaign. We have more on that up next on the AM Show.